Hello, my name is Gibby and welcome to the Chris Chan Update. On January 16th, 2024, YouTuber Keffals uploaded a video interviewing Chris. Since returning to the internet, Chris Chan has been hosting his own live streams, but this is the first exclusive interview that he's given to an established internet personality. Keffals made a splash online a few months ago when she started crusading against the Kiwi Farms. Whether inspired by her or not, there was a massive campaign against the site that actually led to it being taken offline for a while. Beyond that notoriety, Keffals is just a small YouTube channel with around 54,000 subscribers. Throughout the interview, Keffals will refer to Chris as Christine and also use female pronouns in relation to Chris. In order to make this video fair use, I obviously will not be playing large clips of the interview, but just discussing the parts that I find interesting. About 1 minute into the video, Keffals is giving a background as to who Chris is, and she says this.
On August 2nd, 2021, Christine was released from Central Virginia Regional Jail after charges were pressed against her for raping her mother. The charges were dropped on March 27, 2023, and Christine has remained relatively low profile since.
This is untrue, and is something I've discussed many times on my channel. Chris was never charged with raping Barb. His only charge was incest. There is no evidence that what Chris and Barb did was non-consensual, and only speculation on Barb's mental state as to whether or not she could consent. Legally, Chris was never accused of raping Barb, and as far as the evidence we have shows, it was not. The way that Keffals words this, it's also kind of weird. It's like she's implying that Chris was released from jail in 2021 and then spent 2 years on the outside, which is obviously not what happened. He was in jail up until the time of which the charges were dropped. The next section of the video is also completely nonsensical.
And this caught the attention of Christine, who was aware that many years ago, Kiwi Farms would go by another name, the Kiwi Farms.
Chris does not hate Kiwi Farms because many years ago he knew that they were the Kiwi Farms. It's because Noel betrayed him. Kiwi Farms started out as Kiwi Farms, but Chris trusted Noel and Marvin, and Noel was the closest thing that Chris had to a protector. Especially after the leaked phone call. He was the last person standing on Chris's side. At least until Chris broke his no-contact order with Barb and stole money from her bank account. After which time Noel went to the cops with the receipt from this transfer. Chris now calls him Judas. Chris hates Kiwi Farm because its owner betrayed him, not because it's a stalker website or it's full of trolls. Keffals asks Chris to introduce himself, and Chris goes off on what must have been a completely incomprehensible rant to anybody who wasn't already into everything Chris related. I'm not going to play the whole thing, but he calls himself God and Sonichu, and talks about being player one and creator of Sonichu and all the usual nonsense. He also says he's planning to legally change his name soon, which is mildly interesting and is obviously something he's done before.
My full name, which I'm looking to legally update soon enough, is this is Jesus Christine Weston Chandler Sonichu Prime, and I am the prime of all my self-counterparts throughout the multiverse.
I feel like this is kind of nitpicking, but that's basically what this entire video is anyway. But Keffals says that people have been interested in Chris for more than 2 decades.
People have been fascinated with you for more than 2 decades. Now,
if I bust out my trusty calculator here, that would imply that people were interested in Chris before the year 2004, which is not the case. I don't think there's a solid start date to the beginning of Christory, but Anna McLaren's blog in February 2005 is one of the first online documentations of Chris, and the real trolling sagas didn't begin until 2007.
There have been content creators who have made entire careers just out of talking about you.
There's no way of knowing exactly who Keffals is referring to here, but I think it would be extremely dismissive of Gino to say that he made his entire career out of quick content. And creators like myself and Dylan and Smokey all make content other than stuff about Chris. Dylan started with Sonic content. I started with just general oddities or absurds. Smokey started with a lot of Chris content, but since has expanded out into other lolcows. Basically, I think that Keffals' last 2 statements are exaggerations. No, people have not been stalking Chris for over 2 decades. And no, people do not have entire careers online making Chris content. The closest thing to that is actually the Praters, who are making a career off of Chris. This next part actually turned my stomach the first time I watched it. I'm going to play a few seconds of video, and I want you to interact with it, not as a video or a piece of media, but pretend you're in the room with Chris. What would you be feeling right now?
Looking back, do you have any regrets?
Well, I'd say just...
There's something weird with Chris's eyes in this whole video. He barely blinks, but in this shot in particular, his eyes are very red. His voice actually breaks. He's taking deep, shallow breaths. He's getting choked up. Keffals asked Chris his greatest regret, and this is what it looks like when he thinks about the worst thing he's ever done. And then he actually answers the question. And his answer made me feel physically ill.
Essentially let myself fall for the theoretical X's, as I call them, and let them do me over like they did.
This emotion, these extremely sympathetic human emotions that maybe could possibly have gotten someone out there to feel bad for Chris because of what he did, because we can all empathize with guilt and suffering and regret and intense sadness. But that pain on his face was not about what he did to his mother. It was about getting catfished 15 years ago. Jesus. It's unbelievable. He should feel bad for the way he hurts other people, but instead he feels bad because ages ago he was the subject of bullying. Chris specifically calls out Blue Spike, but doesn't mention, like, shoving the medallion up his butt or being blackmailed as a pedo or having sensitive documents leak online. What he cares about from the trolling campaign was losing access to his PlayStation Network account.
The Blue Spike that held my PlayStation Network accountable and saw the loss of Sanchi Medallion number 2.
Chris goes on a rant about how the trolls actually helped him because eventually he became good at meditating or something.
I do appreciate that, they had to help shape and develop me mentally and emotionally so I could have that damage within me to be stronger and more ready for it in the longer run.
And at the end of his statement, he mentions the last couple of years, which could mean, like, since he came out as trans and awoke as a god, or it could mean the last 2 years when he was in jail.
So I could actually finally do something about it within, present tense in the recent years, especially after I managed to clear my mind over the past couple of years. So every blessing counts.
But there's no more hints we can get from Chris's words because Keffals cuts Chris off right there and then jumps to another part of the interview. So Keffals asks a very poorly informed question about Chris's gender. It's a leading question, basically asking Chris if he's really trans or a predator, with no other options. Chris says he's a woman because he has long hair and boobs, which I won't talk about it here, but I have a video about why Chris isn't trans, and I think that this might be further evidence of that. But Keffals mentions how people questioning whether Chris is trans is in fact transphobic, and Chris agrees and then starts talking about other times when he was targeted by homophobia. Let's listen.
Yep, all the homophobia. I mean, I was affected by that as well, and then just the trolls on the internet bullying me and thrusting gay images on me, like when I had the Wikipedia and the individuals behind that, they just put them on the sides, these gay boy ads lead to porn sites or whatever.
Chris was affected by homophobia when trolls made him look at gay people. When he was homophobic, that's how it affected him. Homophobia affected Chris because he was homophobic. Really? Really? I've been skipping most of Chris's ramblings, but I do invite you to watch the entire video. This next part really is the worst bit of it in regards to Keffal herself. Listen to what she says.
There were people who were telling me when this was announced that talking to you and putting this on a public platform would be irresponsible, saying that you are so mentally unwell and you're neurologically, developmentally challenged that it would actually hurt you in order to talk to you. But I didn't go forward with any of those concerns.
She's really sitting there listening to Chris in the interview, not thinking that she's taking advantage of someone mentally unstable. I don't know what reality this lady is in, but she looks so smug about how she saw through the haters and is giving Chris a chance, when anybody with ears can hear how elusive and insane he is. This is depressing. Keffals asks Chris if he finds it hard to trust people after being tricked so often in his past, and his answer is emblematic of just how unstable he is.
I do not find it harder to trust others because it just depends on their intentions, which is deeply resonant from deepest within their energy and their souls, as it were. So it's just my innate sense. It's just like, if their intentions are going to be like...
Chris can still trust people because they give off trusting or untrusting auras, and he can sense that. Is that a reasonable answer? Keffals' question was very leading, basically trying to get Chris to say that the internet bullying him made him unable to trust people. But instead he said he does trust people, because he can sense their aura, because he's God. Then he continues.
Otherwise, I would not have sensed that Trump was so, I'm trying to think of the word here, arrogant as he was long before even the first presidential debate between him and Hillary Clinton, way back in 2016. I think that was in October, if I remember correctly, maybe September. But anyway, I would not have said that long before that. Just that guy was just so arrogant. I mean, you look at his pictures from even before 2016, you would just sense how evil he was beforehand and how evil he was going to be. And I'm not going to say further than that.
He says he needed his aura powers to sense that Trump was arrogant, and his evidence of this was that he sensed that Trump was arrogant before his first debate with Hillary. As if there weren't primary debates and a year's worth of reporting on Trump and also decades of him being a celebrity. No, Chris was able to sense it through his aura detection. Keffals asks Chris about his arrest and the incest allegations. He responds like this.
Now, between the months in which Barbara and I sold on it, all we did was just talk. And I got to know her a little bit better in her past, okay? Just like her father had died and fell off this wagon way back in the day, and her brother Stanley was the one that found him and then just essentially told the rest of the family. That was just one story for example, but it's just helping Barbara feel a little better in her later years and everything, all right? Just talking, helping her to go back to her history, revitalizing her brain cells and everything. Now, aside from that, so...
Chris and Barb just soul bonded, just talked. That's why he bought a book about having sex with the elderly. What he says about Bella is slightly more interesting. He seems very foggy on what actually happened because he said that Bella's comrade called the cops to go arrest Chris at the motel. Which, no, the general internet at large did that. Multiple people alerted the police over the course of many days.
And which, obviously, her intentions on that were essentially making myself go into being unalive, just that's no good, or just get institutionalized or end up in jail. But since I had the choice, I let myself be in jail, and of course I used that time to meditate.
He talks about how Bella is a pervert when previously he had described her as being sex positive as a good thing. But he does not reiterate that she tricked him into doing anything, which is a claim he had previously made and which we all know is not true. He does say that her intention was to get him arrested and to kill him.
What she did, just essentially to try to get me to become unalive and whatever, still backfired on her, but it moreover was a good point to me because I got to clear my head and stayed alive. So that's a testament to it's no demonic or devil persuasion is ever going to make me or force myself to become unalive in general.
Which, again, is not the case. The only mention of Bella wanting Chris to die comes from one of her friends in their Discord server making a comment about how the end goal of trolling Chris was to get him to kill himself. This was mentioned only once, and in context could have been a very dark joke. The idea that Bella manufactured and leaked this call and then called the cops on Chris to get him to harm himself is not something anybody is claiming besides Chris himself. This is a very weird amalgamation of things that were being said at the time. Without playing literally every question, I can't get across just how leading Keffals' questions are. I think anybody watching this would agree that she's trying to get Chris to say certain things. but then he's just being Chris, and so he's not staying coherent for long. She asks him about how being harassed has changed since he came out as trans, with the obvious intention being to get Chris to say that his life is harder now that he's trans. But Chris does not say that.
What's the difference been? How has it changed since you came out as trans?
I'd say kind of more or less the same.
This is my own speculation, but I don't think Keffals really knew about Chris. From all of these questions, I really think that she went into the conversation thinking that Chris might be a quirky, bullied victim of the Kiwi Farms, and that she somehow missed all the red flags about his actual insanity. After the video went live, Keffals offered the full, unedited interview with Chris to her patrons for just the small price of $100,000. I can see why Keffals thinks this is funny. Either some loser gives her $100,000, and also proves that the Quick community are just as insane as she says they are, or the unedited video will remain lost media, and she'll be able to laugh at how upset she believes that Christorians will be that they can't document everything about Chris. And while I do also think that this is actually pretty funny, my issue with it is that it will inspire people to basically hold Chris content hostage. If you think the losers who are trying to become a part of Christory or harass Chris on the street are annoying now, imagine how bad they'll be when they start trying to sell their shaky cam footage of Chris walking down the sidewalk. I actually have a video in the works about weirdos who are trying to be a part of Christory that I'll release in the near future. And I think that if Keffals' plot here is successful and she actually makes money from this, it could turn the idea of stalking Chris into something that's actually monetizable, which is pretty ironic given Keffals' stance on the Kiwi Farms. Overall, I think Keffals comes out of this video looking a lot worse than I expected she would when I was going into it. I was expecting either a white knight defending Chris, or a clueless popular YouTuber having Chris on for views, but this was really neither of those. It really seemed like Keffals thought that she could use Chris as a mouthpiece for her own views, and then Chris didn't play along, and just talked about Sonichu, because of course he did. Thank you for watching. Keffals' video is linked in the description so you can watch it yourself, but if I ever find out that any one of you is sending hate to any creator or any person I ever talk about in my videos, I will shake my head disapprovingly at you and probably block you on Twitter. Just be nice. Just be nice to people in the comment section of my videos and on the internet in general. But yes, thank you for watching. Please be nice to each other in the comments. Consider supporting the creators you admire, and never lose sight of the things that are most important to you.
I got flames around me. They'll just pretend I'm in that kitchen like that dog is. It's like, oh, sure, it's all fine. I could just tolerate it, or I could just whoosh it away and let the flames be gone with holy light, power, and cleansing goodness.